We're back in session. Ms. Schultz, have you and the staff reached a determination on the structure of this sentence?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have. We would like it to stay the way it is, and let me explain. If you read the construct of the sentence, it starts with the pilot's decision. So these three variables that we highlight, the self-induced pressure, the lack of an alternative plan, and the plan continuation bias, we're looking at those from the perspective of what's going on inside the pilot's head. And based on the evidence we have, we can say likely, but we cannot dissect that by individual factor area, because we don't ultimately know. That's why we're using the qualifier likely, what was going on inside his head. But based on the evidence that we see and the human factor science, that's likely, we believe, is the term. I think the Vice Chairman used the terminology preponderance of evidence. I would also add that this approach is consistent with the way the Office of Aviation Safety has identified these type of findings when it relates to human factors variables. So we can certainly open up if you would like to ask Mr. or Dr. Civilian additional questions, but that would be our position.
Thank you very much. Member Chapman, you have a motion on the table. Any thoughts at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I'm interested in whether the staff would be more comfortable with my amendment if the term likely were substituted for the word possible. In other words, it would describe the self-induced pressure as likely self-induced pressure rather than possible self-induced pressure.
So, Member Chapman, I think our concern with that might just be that likely we do intend that to qualify all three factors there, because as I mentioned, we can't say that that was any less of a factor than the lack of the alternative plan in place or his plan continuation bias. So we would like likely to qualify all three.
Mr. Chairman, I'm comfortable with my amendment as originally proposed and suggest that we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other discussion before I call for the question? Okay, it's been Member Hamady. I'm sorry, it looked like you were going to say something there. Okay, thanks. It's been moved and seconded by Member Chapman to state the motion would be the pilot's decision to continue the flight into deteriorating weather conditions was, strike the word likely, influenced by his, insert the word possible, self-induced pressure to fulfill the client's travel needs, his lack of an alternative plan, and his planned continuation bias, which strengthened as the flight neared the destination. It's been moved and seconded. We'll do a roll call vote, and there's no further discussion. We'll do a roll call vote. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman very respectfully votes nay.
Vice Chairman votes nay. Member Hamady.
Yeah, I think with the additional information that likely is meant to modify all of those, respectfully, my vote is nay.
Member Hamady votes nay. Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I respectfully am going to vote nay also, but I struggled with this too for weeks and we have been on the fence, but that additional information made the difference for me.
Thank you. Member Graham votes nay, respectfully. Member Chapman.
And I vote aye, Mr. Chairman.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman, respectfully, after also listening to the discussion, the chairman votes nay. So the motion fails. The vote is 4 nays, 1 aye. The motion fails. Do we have any further amendments to the findings? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adopt the findings as proposed?
So moved.
It's been moved by the vice chairman. Is there
Second.
a second? Member Graham seconds. Any discussion on the findings? Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the findings as presented. We'll vote with a roll call again. Vice Chairman Landsberg.
Vice Chairman votes aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. Member Hamady.
Aye.
Member Hamady votes aye. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Graham votes aye. Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Chapman votes aye. The chairman votes aye. The findings have been adopted unanimously. We'll move now to the probable cause. So, Mr. Curtis, if you'll please read the probable cause, the draft probable cause.
Staff proposes the following probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions, which resulted in the pilot's spatial disorientation and loss of control. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's self-induced pressure and planned continuation bias, which has adversely affected his decision-making, and Island Express Helicopters, Inc.'s inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes. Back to you, Chairman.
Chairman, you're muted.
Yep, never done that before. Thank you, Mr. Curtis, for reading the proposed probable cause. Member Chapman, I'm aware that you may offer an amendment on the probable cause. Are there any other proposed amendments? Okay, with that, Member Chapman, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I circulated 2 possible amendments. I want to refer everyone to what I labeled amendment number 2. And I am going to modify that just slightly. I'm going to, and I'll read the entire text, but I'm going to substitute the word likely for the word possible in my amendment as I originally circulated it. And if you'd like, I can read the amendment.
If you would, please. Thank you very much.
The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions, which resulted in the pilot's spatial disorientation and loss of control. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's likely self-induced pressure and his, insert his, planned continuation bias, which adversely affected his decision-making, and Island Express Helicopter, Inc.'s inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes.
Okay, it's been moved per Member Chapman's motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Hamady seconds. Discussion. Member Chapman, you're recognized.
For all the reasons I've discussed already, Mr. Chairman, I do have a concern about the definitive nature of our identification here of self-induced pressure as a contributing factor. I think it's certainly possible, even likely, that it was present and it contributed. So I certainly don't object to having it mentioned. I just think that we should be less definitive, and that's the purpose of my inserting the term likely. I've inserted the term his just to ensure that there's no confusion in terms of what I'm seeking to modify here. I'm seeking to modify only self-induced pressure, not the other factors identified as contributing factors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. For my colleagues who would like to discuss this or ask questions about this. Vice Chairman, please.
I think I could support that based on our previous discussion. I think likely would be an appropriate modifier, and it leaves the rest of it unchanged.
Member Hamady, any questions? I saw you nodding your head. Any thoughts on that?
I agree. I could support that. The only thing I would ask staff is we typically do not indicate in a probable cause his or her. We usually indicate pilot. I just wanted to get the staff's views on that when we get to the point of staff's views, but I do support the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. Member Graham, any thoughts for you?
I could support that, and I agree with Member Hamady. I'd like to hear their comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I tentatively, I'd say I could support it. I got burned on the last one because I jumped in there and said I could, and then I changed my mind. The thing is, though, I mean, and I respect what you're saying, Member Chapman. I mean, are we changing small dog to puppy? Is it a distinction without difference? What's the difference between possible and likely? Which has more weight? And at this point, I'm not willing to say that possible has more or less weight than likely. Likely is, in fact, a term that we use often, but often in these board meetings, we are deliberating literally that one word there. So what you want to do is, so what you're doing is modifying, and you're modifying the how much weight we are giving to those issues. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. And I really have, I have offered this suggestion based upon some comments that were made by staff earlier, suggesting that it was more than possible, that it was really likely. I think there was a specific reference made to that, and I agree. I think that's fair. And so I intend to be offering a term here which carries more weight than possible.
Okay, all right. And I see, too, some confusion on my part. Yeah, the word possible was not even in there originally, so I got it. So you're modifying it, and you modified the original version that you had. Okay, I think I see what you're doing. All right, Vice Chairman, you look like you had a question or so.
I was confused by your confusion, sir. I think all he's doing is inserting the word likely ahead of self-induced pressure, and then we're trying to figure out how to deal with the rest of the sentence where we'd like some staff input.
And I would certainly defer to staff in terms of whether his should be his or the pilot's, or however that should be constructed is fine with me.
Great. So let's go to staff. Would love to hear staff's viewpoints on all of this, including the pronoun there. And so, staff, we defer to you.
I'll ask Mr. English to go ahead and respond.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. In looking at first the amendment offered by Member Chapman, typically in the construct of the report, the finding should support and be reflected in the PC statement. Staff can agree with the insertion of the word likely as just proposed by Member Chapman. That does match with and is supported by the finding. As we just discussed regarding the finding, we do not prefer to bifurcate those particular issues so that additional insertion afterwards would then serve to bifurcate them and likely would only apply to the self-induced pressure. Whereas in the finding, we have the word likely modifying all three factors. We're comfortable with that. So we would prefer that the insertion of the word likely, if it goes in, doesn't bifurcate from the others, which then I think eliminates your question about the pronoun. But if you do not accept that suggestion, I would have to defer to Ms. Gagne for the question of the pronoun. That would be an editorial.
So, Mr. English, just to be clear, what are you suggesting that contributing clause should state? How should it state?
If I remember Member Chapman's statement, it would say contributing to the accident was the pilot's likely self-induced pressure and planned continuation bias, et cetera, et cetera.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, please.
With due respect, I mean, I understand the point that's being made, but the probable cause and the finding don't reflect each other as currently written. There's no reference to lack of an alternative plan in the probable cause. That is referenced in the finding. And in the finding, likely apparently is meant to qualify all three, or at least the extent to which all three impacted the pilot's decision making. My intent here is to qualify only the extent to which there was or was not self-induced pressure. I don't intend to qualify planned continuation bias. I think that is pretty clearly established. So I think I understand the point that's being made, but I don't think it squares with the way that the finding is actually structured and how it mirrors or doesn't mirror, isn't mirrored in the probable cause, even without my amendment.
Okay. Discussion? Member Hamady.
Mr. English, can you pop up again? The revised finding, the word likely is meant to modify all three, correct? It's meant to modify, let me go back to the finding. It's meant to modify self-induced pressure. It's meant to modify planned continuation bias and meant to modify lack of an alternative plan. So I think that staff is just trying to keep it so likely is on self-induced pressure and on planned continuation bias. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. You said the revised finding. I think you mean the finding as proposed, since the revision did not pass. So the finding as proposed.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So the finding as proposed likely modifies all those phrases. If we go to the probable cause and we do not allow likely to modify all those phrases, we've increased the confidence on these without supporting finding or analysis on planned continuation bias, for example. If we don't let likely modify planned continuation bias, we've kind of jumped a level, I think.
But Mr. English, likely was in the finding as originally proposed. It is not in the probable cause as originally proposed. So your argument doesn't square.
I think we think probable covers that, but the chairman is trying to weigh in on that, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. I think perhaps one way to deal with this would be, so they should be parallel. Whatever was in the finding should transfer over to the probable cause. And it's no longer a proposed finding. It is the finding that the board adopted. So we could make it parallel so they're the same by saying contributing to the accident was likely the pilot's self-induced pressure, his planned continuation bias, which adversely affect his decision making. But then that modifies Island Express helicopters' inadequate review and oversight of the safety management system. And I don't think we're in a position of wanting to modify that. What we're talking about here is modifying the self-induced pressure, the lack of an alternative plan, which, by the way, is not in the PC, and its planned continuation bias. So, but Member Graham, I think you were going to, you wanted to jump in there, I believe.
Well, yeah, I was just trying to clarify that too. So like you said, would we put contributing to the accident was likely, but we are using probable cause here, right? So do we really need to use likely? So, I mean, I may be overplaying my cards here. I don't know if the staff would like that in there, or would we just leave it the way it is? That's where I'm leaning at this point.
I mean, you're right, probable cause and likely. I mean, now we're saying it's probably likely. I mean, how many modifiers do we need?
Right.
So, Member Hamady.
You're muted, Member Hamady.
Man, I am having a problem with that mute button today, but I would just like to remind my colleagues that we've had many discussions about the word likely and probable causes, including on the New Hampshire crash where we inserted the word likely, and everyone supported that, even in the midst of the discussion of a probable cause. So I do support the amendment, but I just thought I'd point that out.
Well, it is true. We do debate literally that word likely many times. Member Chapman, did you run these possible amendments by staff?
They were shared yesterday, but with the term possible, not the term likely.
Yeah. And did you specifically share it with the staff and say, what are your thoughts on this?
I certainly invited comment. There were no comments.
Okay, thank you. So where are we? Is there?
About a friendly amendment?
You have a friendly amendment? Please go ahead.
Well, with all this, and I understand what Member Chapman's talking about and what Member Hamady brought up, which is so true. We've been back and forth with this. Since we had it in the finding, would you like that last sentence? I propose a friendly amendment of contributing to the accident was likely the pilot's self-induced pressure and planned continuation bias, which adversely affected his decision-making, comma, and Island Express Helicopter Incorporated's inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes.
Yes, I had thought, I think I may have mentioned that earlier. However, does that then end up modifying to likely Island Express's inadequate review and oversight? Does that modify that down?
I'd have to ask the grammatical expert at that. That's for sure.
You could put a period after decision making and make that a separate sentence with the appropriate qualifier.
That is true. You could put a period there and say also contributing to the accident was Island Express Helicopter's inadequate review. We could do that, and then by doing that, by saying contributing to the accident was likely the pilot's self-induced pressure and planned continuation bias, which adversely affected his decision-making, period. Also contributing to the accident was Island Express Helicopter Inc.'s inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes, I should say. So that would be for you, Member Chapman, to determine whether or not you'd like to proceed in that direction.
I'm open to that, Mr. Chairman. I'd be interested in the staff's input.
My name may be English, but I will defer to Ms. Gagne for the editorial English.
Hi, yeah. So based on the discussion we had about finding 7, about how strongly staff believes in these factors, I think moving likely as far as the new friendly amendment contributing to the accident was likely the pilots, I think is introducing a level of uncertainty that staff did not intend, that's modifying the decision making. I think staff has made the case on how they think these factors influence the decision making. So grammatically, I don't think I would support moving the likely on the friendly amendment. I think we should go back to discussing the original proposal and whether or not that will work.
Kathy, your recommendation was going back to the original motion that Member Chapman had offered?
Correct. Where he had offered contributing to the accident was the pilot's likely self-induced pressure and his planned continuation and bias. I think the other friendly amendment strayed us even further from the meaning we were intending. So I think maybe let's go back to Chapman's proposal.
Okay. I mean, all right. Well, Member Chapman, it's back to you, sir.
I'm out of ideas, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure where everyone is on this. I'd be happy to take a vote on it if there's no further input.
Okay. Well, we can do that. I plan to call for the question unless there's any additional questions or comments.
can I just have a point of clarification? Are we voting on the friendly amendment changes, or are we voting on the original proposed?
Yeah, and I appreciate the clarification on that. As far as I'm concerned, we never agreed to the friendly amendment, so we would be back to the original, to Tom Chapman's original motion of adding the word likely and then the preposition, or excuse me, the pronoun his.
And I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, just to modify this slightly, we substitute the pilots for the term his. And I can read that. I can read that in its entirety if that would be helpful.
Yes, we're about to vote. It's been moved and seconded. Member Chapman will read the motion. I'm sorry, read the amendment. Please proceed.
My amendment that I'm proposing would have the probable cause read as follows. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions, which resulted in the pilot's spatial disorientation and loss of control. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's likely self-induced pressure and the pilot's planned continuation bias, which adversely affected his decision-making, and Island Express Helicopter's inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I do want to go back to this one point. In finding 7, we had the word likely. Likely was modifying self-induced pressure, and it was modifying planned continuation bias. In this particular case, it has not modified planned continuation bias.
Mr. Chairman, I would just point out it also modifies lack of an alternative plan, and there's no reference to alternative plan in the probable cause. I don't think they reflect each other, even without my amendment.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
I hate to ask this, but could we give staff a 5-minute break to look at the proposed modification of likely the pilot's self-induced pressure and plan continuation bias? Because I don't see the word likely as actually modifying decision-making, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, and we will do that. We're going to give staff until 1:15, which would be 12 minutes from now. So we're going to take a break, and we are cameras and microphones off. We are in recess.